What's going on, everyone? This is Lior with Compass out of Boston. And in this video, we're going to be talking about understanding the entire buying process from A to Z. So let's get at it. What's going on, everyone? This is Lior with Compass out of Boston. And in this video, we're going to be talking about understanding the entire buying process from A to Z. Now, before we get into that, two quick things. Number one, if you guys haven't already subscribed to my channel, smash that subscribe button. I put out tons of new videos every single week talking all of what it's like living in different neighborhoods around Boston, tips on buying, tips on selling and investing, and so much more. So if you haven't already subscribed, smash that button for me. And number two, if you guys are thinking about doing anything with real estate around the greater Boston area, whether it's buying, selling, investing, whatever it is, I get so many calls from you guys watching my videos, and I absolutely love getting those calls. So if you're thinking about doing anything, hit me up on phone, email, text, Instagram, whatever it is, and I will help you out. So let's get into today's content. This is going to be kind of a meatier video, and the reason I want to make this video is because there's obviously a lot of resources online. You can Google, what the process is like, but I think it kind of it can be a little confusing sometimes. So I really wanted to clearly map out the entire buying process from A to Z so that you can really understand all the different components, all the different processes that happen when buying a home, so that when you guys are at that stage, you'll be fully ready, locked and loaded, and nothing's going to intimidate you. So let's start at the very beginning. And for this video, I'm already going to assume that you, at this point, you already kind of know what kind of house, whether it's a single family, condo, multifamily, whatever it may be, you want to buy. I'm going to assume that you already kind of know the locations, right? So you're already kind of actively shopping for that house of your dreams. So the step number one that you're going to want to do is start the pre-approval process with a mortgage broker or a local bank. And basically, all you're going to do with the pre-approval process, you're going to talk to a lender, tell them about your goals, and typically they're going to ask for some upfront financials. So these can include W-2 statements, right? So if you're employed, you're going to show them your income, your different finances, any sort of debt that you may owe. They will typically pull your credit. And kind of start to build out a pretty basic financial profile of you. And from that number, they'll be able to give you a pre-approval letter that basically approves you for a certain purchase price, right? So it could be, hey, Mr. Buyer, based on your financials that I've reviewed, I think you should be able to buy up to $500,000. And that pre-approval letter we'll use to submit with offers to show that you can truly afford that kind of home. Now, we'll talk about this more down the line, but do note that this is not by any means the most thorough evaluation, right? I mean, there's going to be a lot more details pulled once you have an offer accepted, but this is still a pretty good step where the lender can get comfortable with all your financials, your income, your debt, and can basically give you a pretty good ballpark of, hey, what kind of loan can you truly afford to take? All right, so now let's pretend you're shopping around, you're looking at different places, and you finally found the perfect house that you want to buy, and you want to get ready to submit an offer. So step number two is to write up an offer for that dream house. Now, the way that works is typically you'll be working with a buyer's agent, right? And I strongly, strongly recommend that. I've done other videos on the value of buyer's agent, but you definitely should have one. And your buyer's agent is essentially going to lay out the offer. And the offer is going to disclose everything about the transaction, right? So you're basically going to tell the seller, hey, I'm offering you a price of, let's say, $500,000, right? So you're going to tell them the price. You're going to tell them the different deposits, right? So with real estate in Massachusetts, we typically have two deposits. We have an offer deposit, so basically a check that you write out once you have an offer accepted. And then we have a purchase and sales deposit. And at this point, I'm assuming you're familiar with what a purchase and sales is. So you're gonna, you're gonna spell out the two different deposit amounts as well as the total offer price. You're also gonna spell out the different dates on the offer, right? So you're gonna tell the seller, hey, when is this offer good until, right? So typically a turnaround time is 24 hours for the seller to decide, hey, am I going to accept this offer or not? You're then going to put out the timeline for purchase and sales, right, which tends to be anywhere from typically 10 to 15 days or so. And then you're also going to spill out the timeline of closing, right? And to get that information, most buyers agents will know the typical timeline of closing. They'll also probably double check with your lender just to make sure that he can meet those criteria. But you're going to spill out the entire transactional timeline on that offer. The other thing you're going to do on that offer is you're going to spill out all the contingencies, right? So if you have a mortgage contingency, which basically says, hey, all my deposits are going to be protected until the lender fully commits to giving me the loan. And then you're also going to have other contingencies like a home inspection contingency, which we'll talk more about, and any other potential contingencies that may be appropriate for that home. So your buyer's agent is going to draft this offer up for you. You're going to sign it. Then along with a pre-approval letter, he or she will create a package and submit that to the seller. Then the seller, it will be up to the seller's agent and the seller to review the offer and either sign the offer, which obviously you're hoping they will do, or they might negotiate you, right? They might counter you on the price, right? They might go a little bit higher in the price. Maybe they'll counter you on some terms. Maybe they want a faster timeline. But whatever it is, they have the option to potentially counter you on something that you propose. And this negotiation can go back and forth. Typically gets hammered out pretty quickly, especially when there's good buyers and sellers agents involved. And that's when you get an executed offer, right? So an executed offer will happen once you and the seller agree, and then the seller will sign that offer and you will have an executed offer to purchase. Now, step number 3 is deposit. So let's talk about those 2 deposits I mentioned, the offer deposit and the purchase and sales deposit. With the offer deposit, it's pretty standard to have a $1,000 offer deposit. Basically, the reason why we do this, any signed document, like the offer and the purchase and sales is bound by a deposit, right? So again, with the offer, since it's the first stage, we typically only do $1,000. For the purchase and sales, though, we'll typically go anywhere from 3 to 5% of the total purchase price, right? So this is definitely a much bigger deposit, right? Now you're not talking about $1,000. You could be talking anywhere from $20,000 up to $50,000, and obviously a lot more depending on the price. But those are your 2 main offer deposits. Just so you understand, it's not that these checks will be held by what's called the escrow agent, right? And typically the escrow agent is the listing agent's brokerage, right? So let's say the listing agent works for Compass, like me. Basically, Compass will have an escrow account where that money will be held, right? And that's a very legally protected account. They obviously cannot mess and touch that money. It's got to be interest bearing. There's a lot of rules and regulations around these escrow accounts. So don't worry, your money is very well protected and cannot really be messed around with there. All right, so the next step I call is the due diligence period, right? And basically what's going on here is now, congratulations, you have an offer accepted. You've already deposited your check with the escrow agent. So now it's time for you to do your homework and really make sure this is the right property for you and it's the right fit. And the most common aspect of due diligence is the home inspection, right? So basically what's going to happen with a home inspection is you're going to hire a third-party company, right? There's plenty of third-party home inspectors, and you're going to ask them to come in and essentially inspect everything about the property, right? So they're going to look at all the mechanicals, the foundation, they'll look at the kitchens, baths, roof, everything, right? They'll dig in completely and essentially make sure that there are no major issues with the house, right? Because you want to make sure you're not buying something that you think is turnkey, but actually maybe needs a new roof, or the plumbing is completely messed up and it's going to cost you $30,000 to fix, right? So that inspector will work for you, will inspect the property over the course of a couple of hours, and essentially make sure that that home, from a physical perspective, is a good fit. Now, let's say something happens and there's an issue potentially. So at that point, typically the buyer will have the right to renegotiate with the seller, right? They can come up to the seller and say, look, Mr. Seller, I know we agreed on, a price of $500,000, but after doing our home inspection, the inspector found that there's actually quite a bit of issues with plumbing, electrical, maybe there's even a little bit of a foundation issue, and we think it might, these are going to be pretty expensive issues for us to fix. So based on that, you're going to try to renegotiate the price. So maybe you can get a couple of estimates. So let's say you think it's going to be $20,000 of work. You can try to get about $20,000 out the purchase price. And you'll typically, again, negotiate between the buyers and the sellers. And hopefully you'll come to some sort of agreement. Or again, you'll have a new proposed purchase price agreed on by both parties. Now, other due diligence items you may also do, depending on the home and the property. Let's say you're buying a single family that you're thinking about potentially like doing a gut renovation. Maybe you're thinking of doing an addition or something. You might want to do some homework on the zoning, right? On the local zoning and the zoning for that specific lot to make sure that you can really, actually build out an addition. So you might consult with an architect, maybe a zoning attorney, maybe even an engineer, depending on what you're trying to do. So that could be another aspect of some due diligence that you may want to do. All right, so once you're doing your due diligence, the next step is basically to negotiate the purchase and sales and hire an attorney. Now, I cannot stress this enough. Please make sure to hire an attorney. It is the best money you can possibly spend in real estate. There's nothing worse than potentially getting into legal issues when you're not represented. If you're not a lawyer and you don't do real estate law, hire yourself an attorney. I promise you it's worth every penny. So basically what you're going to do is hire this attorney, and this attorney is going to represent you in the negotiation of the purchase and sales. And the way the purchase and sales typically works is the seller's attorney is going to draft the proposed purchase and sales agreement. They're going to send that over to the buyers, and then the buyer's attorney will review, and they'll kind of go back and forth until both parties are satisfied. Now, what's actually in this purchase and sale? Well, it basically has all the terms that have been put out in the offer, right? So the price, the deposits, the timelines, the contingencies, anything else that could have been input into the timeline, plus a lot more legal jargon, right? Basically, typically you'll have language that says clean title must be provided. There are no other easements, and that'll be up to your attorney also to make sure and confirm that there's no other easements, covenants, anything like that. But basically, it's going to be a bunch of legal language that protects both the buyer and the seller during the transactional process. Now, your attorney will be the one that takes lead on this. Again, they'll be doing digging on they'll eventually be doing digging on the title, anything else surrounding the legal instruments of real estate. But basically, these two attorneys, the buyers and the sellers, will go back and forth and eventually settle on a purchase and sales agreement that's satisfactory to both parties. Once that happens, again, this time the buyer and the seller will sign the document. You'll have an executed purchase and sales document, and the buyer will then put his purchase and sales deposit down into the escrow account, kind of binding that contract. All right, so the next step is going to be for the buyer, is to continue the mortgage application process, right? So what's going to happen is once you have the executed purchase and sales, you'll typically send that over to your lender, and then the lender's really going to get going in terms of getting you ready for this loan. They're typically going to ask you for a lot more financial details, right? They're going to scrutinize everything in a lot more detail. They'll typically ask for more bank statements, any other financial details that they'll need. And basically, they're going to work with their departments, the underwriters, the processors, to make sure that all the financials line up and that you can conform to all the guidelines. The lender's also at this point going to typically order your appraisal. And basically what happens, the lender hires a third-party company, appraisal company, which will go to the property and actually conduct a completely neutral appraisal, right? And they're basically just going to the reason the lender does this is they basically want to make sure that the loan you're asking for the property is supported by the market value of the home, because obviously they don't want to be upside down. So it's going to be up to the appraisal company to go out to the property, do a full analysis, and suggest to the lender what they believe is the market value. Now, there's plenty of instances where appraisals come in short from where the buyers want it, even me as the agent, where I've thought it's too low. Don't get too worked up at this point. There's typically, you typically do have a window to respond and actually propose a rebuttal to that appraisal. You will figure out the data, and the different comps that can support the higher appraised value, and we'll typically work and see if we can bump that value up. The next step in the process is really the commitment date. So as we discussed, the lender's going to be doing all this work, getting the appraisal, going through all your financial documents. His underwriter and processor are going to be working, making sure everything conforms to the guidelines. The one thing your agent and your attorney are all going to keep track of is what we call the commitment date. And this date is spelled out in both the offer and the purchase and sales. And what the commitment date is, it's related to the mortgage contingency. So if you recall, we have a mortgage contingency in it for the buyer, basically protecting their deposits in case the lender says, hey, you know what, Mr. or Mrs. Buyer, we actually cannot give you this loan. For whatever reason, either something was wrong with the property or something was wrong with your financials. If that's the case, as the buyer, you obviously don't want to lose your deposits that you've escrowed. So that mortgage contingency protects you. Now, you typically have up to a certain day that you propose to get that full commitment from the bank, right? So let's just say for an easy example, let's say your closing date is August 1st, right? You typically will say, hey, I'm going to try to get a commitment within a week or two, so maybe mid or end July of the closing date, so that because by then the lender should know whether this loan is going to come through. So again, once this commitment date comes, at this point, you either need to have a full in writing commitment from the bank saying, hey, we've reviewed everything, we are good to go and issue this loan. If that's not the case and maybe they need more time, you can always, your team, the agent and the attorney can always issue an extension, right? Because sometimes the bank might say, hey, look, I'm not saying it's a no, I just need more time to process these documents, so you can do that. But basically, you want to keep your eye out on that date, because once that date passes, if you didn't file for an extension and you don't get that, you don't get that approved loan, your deposits could potentially be in jeopardy, and obviously we don't want that. So let's say next step is, let's say you get that commitment date and you got that full commitment. Congratulations, that's absolutely huge. So now we're on to scheduling your closing and the final walkthrough. So basically the attorneys will get together, figure out when's a good time to close. And then the agents are going to typically schedule the final walkthrough. And what happens on the final walkthrough is either the day before the closing or maybe sometimes the morning of the closing, depending on the transaction. You, the buyer, and the buyer's agent, we're actually going to go to the property and make sure that everything is out, right? So let's say you're buying a home or a condo. You obviously want to make sure all of that seller stuff is gone. There's nothing left. And you also want to make sure there hasn't been any additional damage, right? Again, obviously very rare circumstances, but maybe something happened in between the last time you saw the property and that day. You obviously don't want to be caught with that, because once you sign the loan docs, that property is yours and there's nothing you can do in terms of recourse on the seller, right? That's, you own the property, it's your problem. So you basically want to have that final walkthrough right before you sign your loan docs and the deed, basically confirming that, hey, everything is good, the property's good, the seller and his stuff are out, I'm ready to close on this thing. And the final step is, of course, the closing. So you will typically show up to the closing with your attorney. The attorney's going to prepare all the legal docs. And it's during this closing you're typically going to sign on the deed. And that is when ownership of real estate is transferred. Now, the way it actually works is once you sign the deed, typically the attorneys will submit that to the registry of deeds. It'll take a little bit of time, usually a couple of hours. But within a couple of hours, everything becomes recorded within the registry, and then you become the official owner of the property. So that's when that happens, and then the attorneys release all the funds between the buyer and the seller. Everything goes through, and the transaction has been completed. So I know it's a lot of information, but hopefully that gives you guys a really good sense of what a transaction looks like and what are the different components involved. If you guys have any questions, any thoughts, comments, whatever it is, shoot them below. And like I said, guys, I get so many calls from you guys watching my videos, and I absolutely love it. So if you're thinking about doing anything with real estate around the greater Boston area, hit me up and I will help you out.